All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of Locked on Avalanche, and one of us is going to have to change. This was not planned if you're watching on YouTube, but on today's episode, we have a couple moves that the Avalanche made, sending a couple sent one player down, one going on waivers, which we expect to clear, who eventually will get sent down to the Colorado Eagles, while one player gets brought up. Who is that? You're going to have to hang around to hear about that if you haven't followed already. Who else we have? We have a Winnipeg Jets game that we are going to preview as well. And the NHL came out and said maybe the cap situation for next year is looking better than initially thought. So how does that affect the Avalanche? Obviously, it does in a big way. So strap in, get on the Millennium Falcon, because we're going to finish this episode in less than 12 parsecs.
You're Locked On Avalanche, your daily podcast on the Colorado Avalanche. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
For those of you listening at home or in your car, not on video, Kyle and I are both wearing Star Wars shirts. We did not plan that whatsoever. It is not May the 5th. So it's our secondary affinity is nerd culture. So and I mean, you see us wearing Star Wars stuff all the time if you watch on YouTube. Yeah. So here we are. This is not Locked On Star Wars. This is Locked On Avalanche, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making this your first listen of the day. That's always appreciated. You can follow us on our social media outlets, LOPN_Avalanche on Twitter, Locked On Avalanche on Instagram. Questions, comments, concerns, opinions, lockedonavalanche@gmail.com. And follow us on our YouTube channel over on YouTube. Hit subscribe and get notified when a new show goes live. All right, sir, we got some movement in the roster as we had Ben Meyers get sent down to the Eagles. Because of his standing, he does not have to go through waivers. Who did have to go through waivers is Sedlak. So he probably around noon ish tomorrow. We're recording this on Tuesday night. So, you know, when you're hearing this on Wednesday, sometime in the afternoon, it's all expected that he will clear. And then he will get sent down to the Eagles. So you and I, when that came out, you and I were texting back and forth. Who's it going to be that gets brought up? And we found out that it will be Martin Kaut that gets brought up. I think that's a little bit of a surprise. I'm not against it. I was a little bit surprised, and the reason why I say that, and then I'll let you give your thoughts on it. The reason why I thought it was kind of surprising is because you heard Jared Bednar at the beginning of the season when they made kind of like their final moves and sent guys down. You heard him say he thought that Bowers had a good camp and that he would probably be back at some point in the season. Well, this is the first moves that they're making, and it's not Shane Bowers. So I think that's the only reason why I'm surprised. I think, you know, Kaut was right there at the end too. Yeah. So I thought it was going to be one of those two guys. Maybe Oscar Olausen had an outside chance to do it, but he was kind of a move before the last moves. It just kind of felt like it was either going to be Kaut or Bowers, and they went with Kaut. Start with the demotions of Sedlak and Meyers, and did that surprise you at all?
Yes and no. It's interesting right off of Ben Meyers getting a goal. Next day is, thanks for that, bud. See you in Loveland.
Well, right.
It's odd. Sedlak, I mean, he's shown promise, but there's also some room. There's some room for refinement. So you kind of understand that too. So when you see them both going down, immediately you're like, oh, who's coming back? Who's coming back? But the situation with Landy and Helm, it's not going to be tomorrow or next week. So to see Kaut coming up was interesting. Especially with everything you saw in the preseason, everything you heard out of Bednar. I think this is possibly the Avalanche finally giving Kaut like the final chance.
Right.
Like You're going into a Winnipeg game tonight. You're going into a back-to-back this weekend. I mean, what's it going to hurt if you drop a game here or
Well,
there? You're giving him
yeah.
the experience. What's it going to hurt?
I think this is just the Avs wanting to, maneuver things around early, do this now, early in the season, rather than later in the season, mid-season. How you have Minnesota Wild struggling right now. So you have some games to kind of finagle with this stuff. And I mean, after Meyers, I thought played a pretty good game against Minnesota, and he scored a goal and a nice tip in, and you wake up the next morning and you're getting sent to Loveland. So I think I don't think it's more of that they were not playing well, and more of the Avs wanting to kind of just shuffle some lines and shuffle some players just to get different looks and see what works. And just because those guys got cut, and using air quotes, I think this is Jared Bednar's way of saying, like, you weren't that far off, and you weren't, you were pretty close of making this team. So let's see what happens if we do include you, and get a couple games out of that, because you're not getting Gabe Landeskog back for a little bit. Helm, while he is skating, he's still not practicing full on, and he's still in a red jersey. So those guys that just missed out, bring them back. And you don't have to do like wholesale replacements. And that's not what they're really doing. They're just bringing up Martin Kaut and see what happens. And then if he's playing well, you ride that. Play him for a few games. If you don't really feel like he's doing anything, and you had faith in Shane Bowers, then try Shane Bowers. And maybe by that time, Darren Helm is back and you can play with that. So I think this is just part of the Avalanche wanting to see different looks, because you have a lot of guys that can play these roles, and they want to see who's maybe going to take advantage of those roles. And first up is Martin Kaut. So you're going to try him out. Now, the other one, because there's two guys that got eventually sent down, if Sedlak obviously clears. Who's the other one? I think that's going to Jacob MacDonald, because they didn't bring up two players. Yeah. He was with the team. I think he was cleared to play. He was practicing with them. So you would have to think Kaut's for one of them and Jacob MacDonald is for the other.
And you also have to you got to look at the timing here, because like you just kind of like said it under your breath. If he clears waivers, the deeper it goes into the season, the more these guys are going to start tracking, like accumulating stats. And like, to all the nerds out there, you remember playing the first Sim City on your computer, and you had that cheat code where you typed in FUNDS and you would get $10,000. But if you did it too much, a monster would come and take out your city. The same goes for waivers.
Yeah.
You could play with it now while everybody's still fresh and everybody's worrying about their team and not really doing that much depth scouting. But say 10, 20 games into the season, if you start making these moves, everybody's going to see what Kaut's doing. Everybody's going to see what Bowers is doing. And that waiver wire is not going to be that easy to clear. And then you're going to take that gamble on playing with that line, and you might lose somebody you're working on. So go ahead and get it done now. I understand the philosophy, and this is not going to dismantle or derail what the Avalanche are building. This is just experimenting. And we're in a good place where we can do this, where we could take the regular season and play around with it. So that's an indication on where this team is sitting and what the Avalanche are trying to accomplish.
Yeah, no, I think that's a pretty good point. Like you said, I think Lukas Sedlak is going to be down in Loveland, and I'm a little bit surprised that they pulled the trigger on him so quickly, because it just seemed like Jared Bettman really liked what he did in the preseason. So I was a little bit surprised that they, are making a move. Maybe they're just confident that he's obviously going to clear waivers. So let's do this now and maneuver things around. It seems like Curtis McDermott is staying put for now. He's entrenched in that role until you get a healthier roster. So he's not really going anywhere. So I think that, what's that third line going to look like? It's going to be McDermott, MacDonald, and Kaut. That's a pretty beefy line. But it's two defensemen playing forward positions, if that's the route that they go, and a prospect who hasn't really done much, when he's been brought up. So kind of a big roll of the dice here for the Avalanche, going up against a division rival with the Jets.
Well,
We'll
and
see.
you mentioned Minnesota struggling. That only helps us in being able to play around with things. Like Chicago, Arizona are doing better. St.
Mhm.
Louis is just kind of out there. We're about to talk about Winnipeg,
Yeah,
and like
I
in
think St. Louis
Dallas,
has played one game, unless they
yeah,
played tonight. Like
it's
the schedule is crazy. Let me
wow, and
see.
water's wet.
Yeah,
NHL scheduling. Who knew? Um,
St. Louis is played one game. I'm checking the games that we're on as we're recording this, and I don't believe no.
and we have to play back-to-backs all month.
Yeah,
Thanks, NHL.
right.
Um,
I don't get it.
but it just helps with being able to make these moves that the division is kind of wonky and everybody's figuring things out. We can figure things out in-house on our own. We're not worried about our positioning in the central because things look okay for right now.
All right, so we talked about Winnipeg. We're going to kind of preview that, see what's going on over there right now in the early stages of the season. But first, we have Bet Online and betonline.net. It's your number one source for football and hockey betting for this season. Find all of the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game that you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all of your sport wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your favorite games and events, including Major League Baseball, MMA, boxing, and golf. So head over to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. That's betonline.net, where the game starts.
Bing.
Bong. Winnipeg Jets off to a, what are they, 1-1? I just had their thing up here, and now I've lost it. So they're 1-1.
They are.
And they seem to like 4-1 scores. They had a 4-1 game against the New York Rangers to open their season and a win, and then a 4-1 loss to the Dallas Stars. So not a lot to go on, obviously, for them, but it's more or less just kind of looking at their roster. What are they going to be good at? Where are their struggles possibly? I don't know. Winnipeg was that last year. They were that kind of like hot team that there's always those teams that like just miss out either on the playoffs or just missed out going to a conference final. And then going into the next season, everybody thinks like those teams are going to take that jump and take that leap.
Yeah.
And I bought into that last year too with Winnipeg. I really thought they were going to be that team that did take that next step and actually took a step backwards, maybe a couple steps backwards. So now heading into this season, nobody really has faith in them anymore, and it's just going to be more of the same. But I don't know. Like they have talent, obviously, on the offensive end. I think they have a very good defense, just a sound defense. You don't have anybody on this defense, that's Cale Makar-esque, but who does? And you have an all-world goalie. So why can't this team do more? What is it about them that just struggles all the time? That to make really a playoff push? Because you look at what they have up and down the roster, and you're like, this should be a pretty good team.
I know for a fact that locker room is wonky. There's a reason why they pulled the C.
Yeah, man.
It's
oof.
Like Winnipeg on paper, like it's a young team, it's a flashy team, one of the best goalies in the league, who's wasting his talent in Winnipeg. But on paper, this should be a team that should be in the playoffs and contending every year. The way things are run in the locker room and the leaders of that team always throw a monkey wrench into things. That's why people want out so bad. And I understand. And it's something you have to overcome as a team, but it can hold you back. And Winnipeg's one of those teams, like in the NBA, you forget the Sacramento Kings exist. You do the same thing with Winnipeg. Like you forget that Winnipeg's a team. Like if you have to list like favorite logos, favorite jersey, like Winnipeg's never there. There's not a favorite anything when it comes to Winnipeg, unless you want to talk about Atlanta Thrashers and you point to the Jets. They
Mm,
have the smallest arena. They're way out there. Like
yeah.
it's not a metropolis to get out there, but
You need an old
eh,
prospector to get you there.
yeah, you got to take a mule and a zip line, but it's one of those teams when they come in there, like we're looking like the all-time record between the Avs and the Jets. It's the Avs have 22 wins and the Jets have 21. Like it's almost dead even, and it's one of those teams that come in there and surprise you. And it's always I always equate the Jets as like game 63, one of those Thursday night games that nobody cares about, and you turn on the game, the Avs lose 3-2 to the Jets, and you're like, whatever, we're looking forward to this game. And it's like a marquee matchup on the weekend. That's usually how Jets games go. And with all these moves that we talked about in the first segment, this is setting up for one of those weird games. They haven't played that much. They've been very quiet. And again, we talk about it all the time. The bullseye is on the back of the Avalanche because they are the defending Stanley Cup champion. What better way to say, hey, we changed up who our captain is. We're going into the season with a new banner, a new voice, a new mindset. Let's beat the defending Stanley Cup champions.
Yeah.
And we have to put something past Hellebuck too.
I like your reference to the Sacramento Kings because I like teams like that. I like teams that are in like small like
Yeah.
markets that when they do well, those fans are passionate. And I remember a couple years ago when Winnipeg made the playoffs. I think it was like their first year in the playoffs when they moved back to Winnipeg,
Hmm.
or I should say this, the first year they made the playoffs since they moved back to Winnipeg. I don't know if I said that before. A lot of words were coming out, and I wasn't really comprehending them. But yeah, the first year that they made the playoffs since the move back to Winnipeg, that atmosphere was crazy. Like I love that stuff. Same thing
Yeah.
with Sacramento. Yeah, Sacramento's like never in it, but when they are,
Hmm.
that place is nuts. Like the old Chris Webber and Jason Williams
Oh
days.
yeah.
Those were great. Those were great. But yeah, when
Vlade
they're
Divac.
Vlade, yes. Mitch Richmond. Remember Mitch
Mhm.
Richmond? Oh yeah. But like those, like when those teams are not in the thick of things, it's just like they're another team. And you still have the
Yeah.
passionate fan base. I get that. But you look at this team and they just, yeah, the Blake Wheeler thing. I put yourself in that situation, man.
Mhm.
You are the captain of an NHL franchise, which is a coveted thing. You know, they just don't go, there's some teams that don't have a captain because that's how like sacred those things are, and they want to make sure they get it right. Winnipeg came out, brand new coach, Rick Bowness, saying like basically we got it wrong.
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't say that, but they're saying like, no, like we are stripping you of your captaincy. You don't see that a lot.
No.
And put yourself in Blake Wheeler's shoes in his position. How do you? You're gonna be man up, but how do you stay loyal to a team who's not staying loyal to you? I mean, I'm not in there, and I don't have a beat on the ins and outs of what's going on in Winnipeg, but just on the surface, that's a terrible look.
Yeah. And
Hmm.
it's bad to be a captain of a team that when players are traded out of there, like it's the word of mouth that's going around the locker rooms. This is how you do it here. Oh my goodness. In Winnipeg, we had to go through this. Like if you get that kind of reputation, players don't want to go there. And then it also reflects back on the captaincy. So you could kind of understand when Bonus gets in there, he's like, hey, I've been inheriting the trade pieces from this team, and I've heard about how things are here. I'm going to take this captaincy off you, and we're going to refresh and reset.
Yeah,
Nothing against you and your play, but when it comes to leading in the locker room, we're not doing this.
yeah. I mean, and he's let's see, trying to find. So he's got, and like I said, they've only played 2 games, so take this with a grain of salt. But Wheeler has an assist on the season. You have guys like Scheifele and Ellers and Kyle O'Connor. I think is,
Yeah.
uh, one of the most overlooked offensive players in the league, if you ask me. Like he's one of those guys. You put him on, a team in New York or LA, and he's a superstar.
Yeah.
Who else you got? So I'm looking at their cap too. Like they're good cap wise. They have $4 million in cap space. They don't have any contracts that are just like glaring. You're like, oh my God, what are you doing? So, and they have some good sign, and they have, I think, a fantastic young player in Cole Perfetti.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like he has all the talent in the world. So we'll see. I think Winnipeg could be one of those teams that is just hanging around there and is pushing for a playoff spot, or could upset some teams' playoff aspirations at the end of the year. I don't know. And I always go back to the goalie situation.
Yeah.
When you have a goalie that is top tier in the league, you always have a chance.
Yeah.
So the Avalanche are likely going to go in and see Connor Hellebuck, because they've had a day or two off. I don't know when was that game against Dallas. That was on Monday. So they've same schedule as the Avs. Played on Monday, day off, and then they're playing on Wednesday. So likely you will see Hellebuck. So yeah, you're gonna have to be on your game. And now with the Avalanche, with these changes that they're gonna have, like we were talking about in the first segment. So the top line's doing fantastic. Second line, maybe some tweaks there. So it's gonna be an interesting game, because we, even in the last episode, we talked about all the things that the Avalanche have to kind of fix with their penalty kill. You're in that stage of the season where you're still fine tuning things, and the Avalanche are making changes on bottom line. So should be a fun and entertaining game, if you ask me.
Yeah, especially like to see Kyle Connor, Ehlers, Wheeler, and then test these new adjustments on Hellebuck. I mean, this is what you want to see. This is a good test for the Avalanche.
Yeah, definitely. And I just touched on the Winnipeg cap situation, and we wanted to talk about that too, because you had Commissioner Bettman come out and say that things are looking good for the league as far as the players paying back what's remaining on the escrow. And maybe a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the projections for the next 3 or 4 years with the cap. And the understanding was next year it was only going to go up for $1 million, which it's done for the past couple of years. And then after that, significant increases. Bettman came out and said this escrow might get paid off. He said it's going to be very close, but it's looking good for them to pay it off, the players to pay off what's remaining in the escrow. And if that happens next year, instead of going up by $1 million, it could go up by as much as $4 million. So that is huge. And not only does that mean next year, if it goes up by $4 million, those projections, all of those projections are go up.
Yeah.
Because the big one was, it went $1 million, and then I think 4 million, and then 10 million compared to what it is right now.
Yeah.
So if you're going up 4 million when it's supposed to go up 1, those next couple of years, you're going to see even bigger increases. And the Avalanche, and every team is sitting there, but obviously we're talking about the Avalanche sitting there saying like, oh yes, please do that. Because we signed a guy for a lot of money, if you didn't notice. So that 4 million will help out a boatload.
I look at it two ways. Like, it makes the Nathan McKinnon deal for all the naysayers, or those that were like, that's still a lot of money. It kind of calms that narrative.
A little bit, yeah.
It makes that a little bit easier to deal with. But hearing that come out of the mouth of Gary Bettman, it just sounds like a very it just feels dirty, where it's like, hey, if you guys pay us off, we could raise that salary cap 4 million instead of the 1. Like, it feels like just kind of trying to get the players to pay it back quicker. And I don't know, like it's got a weird feeling to it.
So, the thing is, they did tell teams to operate as if it's only going up $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
Teams will do that. You know who's not going to do that? Player agents.
Yeah.
Player agents are going to hear that and be like, oh no, I'm going to operate as if it's going up $4 million.
Yeah.
So for him to say that, and if it doesn't happen, there's going to be a lot of angry people when it comes to franchises, because they're kind of saying like, you could have just shut your mouth on that. And now in the end, it's if it happens where it's only $1 million, teams are just going to go to agents and be like, look, like, I can't do anything about I know you're trying to operate with thinking that we're going to go with $4 million. It's not. That's the reality of the situation. We I can't deal with it on a possibility or you thinking that it went up. But that just stirs up emotions in everybody, especially players and agents. So it would, if he's doing this, just kind of freewheeling it, and I don't think he was. I think the what's his name, Bill Daly, the players union guy, he was there too, and he was kind of backing this stuff too. So you're right. Like, in one aspect, it's Bettman, and anything the guy says, you have to be like, okay. But if other people are there kind of saying like, maybe.
The man who called Caleb McCarr on national television.
Mm-hmm. And the guy who just, throws his hands up with the Kyle Beach situation and was like, don't look at us. That guy, that's the guy that is making these comments. So,
and then throws out, oh, by the way, possibly 4 million instead of 1. It's on you guys. Come on. Like, right. It has this weird whiff of just Bettman-y.
But at the same time, I get it, because the league is doing well.
Yeah.
The league is doing very well. Viewership is gone up. So all of that stuff comes into play. And I was saying that when the Avs we're talking about signing Nathan McKinnon into this deal, saying the cap, in my mind, was like, it has to go up. It has to, because the players should be able to pay all that back with all the revenues coming in. It's just the league is in a good space money-wise. So pay that off, and then you get benefited by the cap going up. And it's kind of where we're at right now. But he kind of was talking out of both sides of the mouth just by saying like, it's going to be close.
Yeah.
And it's early, the season has just started. So to say like, oh yeah, they'll have it paid off is way premature. So that's why he kind of said it as it's looking good. I would say just don't make this statement until like the All-Star break. You know what I mean? When you have your press conferences and stuff like that during an All-Star break, bring it up then, because then you have a way better understanding of where the league's at, and then you can come out and say it's happening. You can say like, we are 100% on track for this to happen. But instead, what you did now was say like, there's a big maybe, there's a big but. Let's talk about your big but, Gary Bettman.
And maybe it's because I'm taking a business class right now in college and it's just on the forefront of my mind, but this is like business 101. You don't do that, because you're opening the door. If this doesn't happen at the end of the year, everybody gets to point fingers. Another reason to hate Gary Bettman.
Right.
Like, you said, if we do this, why aren't we getting this? And then it makes the league look bad. It makes Gary Bettman look worse, if that's even possible. And then you keep this close to the chest and you put it in the inner channels. You don't announce this publicly. You don't announce theoretical for a business. It's just, you don't do that.
I think he just got excited, and it would be exciting. It is exciting that the league is kind of in a good position. But
does he get excited? He has one emotion.
Yeah.
It's just
no emotion. That's basically what do we get? So we'll see. That is definitely something that we will be monitoring as the season goes along, because that helps the Avs immensely, as it does every other team in the league. All right, everybody, that is going to wrap it up for today. We will be back tomorrow discussing the outcome of the Avs versus the Jets. That one is back at Ball Arena. Should be a fun and entertaining and exciting game as always. So thank you for making this your first listen of the day. That is always appreciated. For Mr. Kyle Shaggy Von Doom Sullivan, I am Chris Maselli. This is the Locked On Avalanche podcast. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Let's get an Avalanche win.